Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. I am Caleb, and today I am going to be reviewing the book Star Wars Dark Legends by George Mann. And this is quite an interesting and unique book for me because pretty much all of the Star Wars books I've read up to this point have been full-length novels. And you don't really see that many short story collections when it comes to Star Wars, but this is a short story collection. I would say probably aimed at a younger demographic, maybe middle grade-ish, maybe a little bit above that, but it's not like an adult, I wouldn't say demographic that it's aimed towards, but it certainly can be read and enjoyed by adults. But yeah, you don't really see short story collections in Star Wars all that often, or short stories in general. A lot of the ones that are released nowadays and even back during the days of the EU were largely novels of some kind, whether they be adult novels, YA novels, middle grade novels, whatever. You don't really see many short story collections. And this one obviously is more of a horror kind of one. It's Dark Legends after all. It's stories that have more of a horror element to them, which is interesting to see. As far as some positives for this book, I think that the majority of the stories in here were quite enjoyable. There are 7, I believe, in here, and I think that 2 or 3 of them were like 10 out of 10, really fantastic. The rest of them, there was 1 or 2 that I thought were just kind of okay, and the rest of them I thought were actually quite good. So the stories that are in here are The Orphanage, Buyer Beware, The Predecessor, Blood Moon, Dark Mirror, The Gilded Cage, and A Life Immortal. Out of those, I think The Predecessor and The Dark Mirror were definitely my favorite ones, especially The Dark Mirror. I really enjoyed that one, and The Predecessor as well, and A Life Immortal, the final story, which I believe is also the shortest one in this book, was also really good. One thing I really liked about this collection is kind of the variety in terms of the subject matter. Obviously, all of these are more Star Wars stories with a horror lean to them, more kind of horror-esque. But I really liked the different sort of feels that some of them had. Some of them were basically just Star Wars stories that were just a little bit more horror-like, while other ones were kind of our typical horror stories that you might hear about, like ghosts or vampires or werewolves or whatever, but set within the Star Wars universe. So it was a nice variety of stories, and it was interesting to see both regular old Star Wars stories with a little bit more of a horror twist to them, along with our own horror stories that have been told over the centuries or whatever. But within the Star Wars setting. For example, as far as ones that are more like stories that have been told here on Earth, The Orphanage kind of, to me, struck me as a little bit kind of vampire-esque. The Predecessor is kind of a ghost story. Blood Moon is kind of a werewolf story. But then there are other ones like Buyer Beware, which is kind of about this ancient artifact that is imbued with some kind of dark power, which I suppose could also be kind of a typical horror story, but I feel like is not as much like a traditional horror story. And there's some other ones. A Life Immortal has a Sith who is seeking immortality, but it goes kind of badly. And there's just a nice variety of stories in here that I really enjoyed. A big negative that I can think of for this book, aside from thinking that 1 or 2 of them just didn't quite land for me, is I wish some of them had been a bit longer. For example, The Dark Mirror, which was, I think, my favorite story in this collection, I think could be the length of like a novel or at least a novella. I think that the content and the sort of idea behind that story could really work in a longer form story. So I kind of wish that they had been willing to make these a little bit longer. But as it is, they work really well as kind of quick little stories you can read in like 5 or 10 minutes. And I think the length works just fine, but I do wish that some of them had been a bit longer. But overall, I did really enjoy this collection. I was a little unsure how I would feel about it because of, with horror stories, I think sometimes maybe it can come across maybe a little bit cheesy or something like that. But I think it came across really well, especially in the case of the ones that are more based on like the typical ghost stories or werewolves or whatever. Those ones I was a little more unsure about, but I think it was executed quite well in here. And overall, it's a really solid book, I think. As far as a rating out of 10, I'd probably give it an 8. Again, I enjoyed most of the stories in here. There were one or two that didn't quite work for me, but on the whole, I did really enjoy this, and there were a couple of ones in here that I absolutely loved. So that's pretty much all I got for this video. Let me know down in the comments if you have read this book or if you are interested in reading it. And if you have read it, what was your favorite short story that was in here? I'm curious to hear what other people's favorites are. So that is pretty much all I got for this video. So thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.